This is, let's call her Juliet. She lives in a small town in Maine, and Juliet is a sex worker.
Sex work is work. We deserve respect, we deserve human rights, and we deserve a safe space to conduct our work.
In order to protect her identity, we're using Juliet's stage name. She's not only an exotic dancer, but she's also an escort. Her home state is about to partially decriminalize sex work. And if we're like Juliet, part of the 66% of folks 18 to 44 years old who support decriminalizing sex work, this sounds like a step in the right direction, right? Actually, wrong. Well, at least according to Juliet, who says partial decriminalization can actually be worse.
Full decriminalization is the only good option. It is the safest option for consensual sex workers. When you criminalize any part of providing or buying sex, you are harming. Like I have this person here. When are you free this week?
To better understand what Maine is trying to do and what it might mean for the country, we spent a week there talking to sex workers, a victim of trafficking, a man who pays for sex, a detective who runs sting operations, the politician spearheading the legislation, all to try to answer the question, what's the main problem with sex work? While this bill is becoming a law in Maine, sex work is a deeply complicated issue as old as time. It's often been called the oldest profession in the world, but the way we think about sex work has changed dramatically in the last decade or two. I mean, TikTok is filled with thirst trap videos that push you to Instagram, and then to a link tree, and then finally OnlyFans, an online platform where subscribers pay performers for access to usually adult photos and videos. The social stigma around virtual sex work seems to be fading every day. Porn stars are becoming influencers, going on podcasts with huge audiences.
You have star energy.
Thank you. Or just building their own audiences on mainstream corners of the internet.
Hey, it's Bella Danger, and I'm back to answer the internet.
But while popular perception of sex work is definitely changing, laws like Maine's are somewhat of a misnomer. Yes, it is decriminalizing one aspect of sex work, but it's not actually a step toward full decriminalization.
How are you feeling about seeing our client today?
I always feel good about him. He's a pro.
The official name of Maine's new law is LD 1435. And the gist of it is that individuals who sell sex are no longer committing a crime. Only the Johns who buy sex are.
Basically, you stop arresting the victims of this, which is the people who are selling sex, and you arrest the buyers, because it's a demand reduction strategy.
This approach is often called the Nordic model because it was first deployed in Sweden in 1999.
In the places where this has been done, the amount of prostitution in the society decreases. So that's the hope of the Nordic model, is that we can penalize the buyers, make the fines they pay used to help the women recover, and stop arresting the women, and make it possible for them to build new lives.
The Nordic model, or what they're calling the equality model in Maine, is built on two beliefs. One, that all sex work is harmful, both to individuals and society. And two, there's really no such thing as voluntary sex work. Sex workers like Juliet strongly disagree with that. She and other supporters of full decriminalization draw a sharp distinction between voluntary sex work and those who are trafficked into it, which we'll get back to in a little bit. The Maine bill is the first of its kind in the US, but we've seen the Nordic model employed elsewhere. Supporters like Lois point to declining rates of prostitution in these countries, but the data used to support that claim is inconclusive. For example, the Swedish government claims street prostitution decreased by 50% in the 10 years following implementation, but multiple academic studies reject that claim, saying there are no reliable data demonstrating any overall decline in people selling sex. Basically, there may be fewer sex workers on the street, but that doesn't necessarily mean there are fewer sex workers. Opponents of the Nordic model include a laundry list of human rights organizations, some of which surprise me. The ACLU, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the World Health Organization all oppose the Nordic model in favor of full decriminalization. Now, that's not to say any and all prostitution is fair game. These groups draw a red line between trafficking, coercion, and exploitation, all of which they say should be prosecuted, and voluntary sex work, which they say should be decriminalized. These groups point to examples like street-based sex workers in France, who reported that the introduction of the Nordic model saw clients' bargaining power increasing, rates decreasing, and a need for sex workers to take more risks. Basically, increased police action against street-based sex work made Johns more fearful of arrest. Fewer Johns buying means falling rates for sex workers in a more competitive market. And buyers' fear meant both reduced negotiating time for sex workers as well as less time to assess potential danger. One study from Norway found that any amount of criminalization for sex workers increased the prevalence of violence against them. Some local supporters of the Maine law don't make the distinction between trafficking and voluntary sex work, though. Tricia, who lives in Maine, is firmly behind the new law. She's a survivor of teenage sex trafficking and now runs a nonprofit that seeks to end sexual exploitation. She's worked with numerous trafficking survivors in Maine, whom she says were sold for sex by boyfriends, family members, and even strangers, or what she's called survival sex to fuel an addiction.
I personally will never believe that sex work can be work. The majority of the people, even who say that they're out there willingly selling sex, have trauma in their history, have some story that brought them to that place. We need to find other ways that don't exploit people, because this is not the world's oldest profession, it's the world's oldest oppression.
But Juliet, who calls herself a consensual sex worker, disagrees.
I had a wonderful childhood, a wonderful relationship with my mother and my father. I went to a private liberal arts boarding school. I went to college. I have 2 degrees. And this was something I was drawn to. Intimacy and sex is a need for humanity, and they will always seek it out. If there is no safe outlet for people to receive these services, they're going to find unsafe ways. They're going to use unsafe methods.
Maine's new law could have far-reaching impact. States like New York and Massachusetts are already considering similar bills, even though popular opinion, especially among Gen Z and millennials, moves in the opposite direction. And this was just part 1 of a special series looking at modern sex work. So if you're interested in doing a deeper dive through the stories of the people we met in Maine, check out part 2 and 3 on the NBC News YouTube page.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.